morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of World Skills America, I would like to thank you all for your participation. If Paul could please pull up the World Skills America's screen. Among its roles, World Skills America aims to promote professional education among 26 countries, and today we have the webinar organized by the Committee for Educational Professional Education with Mr. Paula from the Dominican Republic and Ms. El Cisco from El Salvador, who have organized many an action in this sharing of knowledge and experiences among its members and guests. And today, as we have every month, we are holding this webinar to further share knowledge. We would like to pass on the instructions while welcoming everyone. And so that we are all together here to share this knowledge. In order to ask questions, use the Q&A icon at the base of the screen. And prior to starting, please select the language that you need translation into. You can choose either Spanish or English. We have two of our colleagues working with us on this task. So if you will put up the main screen, please. The screen with the speaker, please. Professor Elvésio Siqueira de Oliveira, a very committed person in terms of professional education mainly, and he's been studying this very focus on people with disabilities, a task that for us is strategic in the state of São Paulo for Brazil. And as you all know, as a recognition of by international institutions, it is essential. And for the exchange of knowledge, teaching techniques, and competences that are involved in the professional training for people with disabilities. I can assure you that the work that we do at this unit, along with Professor Elvésio, are a world reference. He will be able to focus better on what are the specific points, and he'll leave his contact details, email, telephone, and so on, so that you all can further communicate, disseminating these competencies and skills that are necessary to each and every person that can actually share this knowledge among those who are involved in the social processes back in their countries and their communities. Now the floor actually is with Mr. Elvésio. Floor is yours. Good morning, Professor Espada, all dear colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here sharing in terms of what Senai has been done in the inclusion of people with disabilities. It's a rather ample subject, and we are talking economic inclusion of those with disabilities. Next screen, please. We have a reference. in terms here of international symbols specifying per disability, and this is about accessibility. It has been adopted by the UN back in 2016's summit. We want to deal with the importance of education in the inclusion of people with disabilities. And if we could actually contextualize historically, how has society dealt with people with disabilities and how they have dealt with that along the years, so that we have a reference of in terms of the timeline? We can have four major phases. Firstly, social exclusion, how it helped guide human societies. That is the old age or Christianity. And we had rules or a legislation that would set forth how to exterminate people with disabilities. So we can actually find that in terms of time and history and how we used to see that globally. Then we have the Middle Ages. And then we had the concept of the right of a right to welfare and the institutionalization of people, segregation, in other words. And it's a priority at that time in history. Blindness, for instance, wouldn't be contactable, communicable, in other words. Nevertheless, people were ignorant of that fact. After Christianity, we have the right to life, but it's still segregated. In modern times, from the 19th century on, the end of the 18th century, we see more the need for integration. And then that is very obvious during the Great World Wars in the early 20th century. It's the role of people with special needs to find means to be included in the community of these people. And there is no concern in initially in adapting structures to people. Now we have postmodern times when we have major sociologists and theorists pointing out this early 2000s as the time of marking, as the milestone in terms of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And the prioritization here is the adaptation to the environment, and that is the real inclusion. And here we can start talking this concept in Brazil, especially, pretty much used a term. If we'll pass on the slides, please. With evidences here of what exclusion meant in the 12 stone rule. If a child would be born, for instance, at this point with disabilities, it was the role of the parent, the father, especially speaking, to exterminate that child. Spartan societies, on the other hand, and we see that clear in the next screen, I beg your pardon. It's the role of the state at this point, and children should be presented in open air, in public areas, for the extermination of these lesser, so to speak, individuals. And it's important to see that there was a legitimation of abandonment and the extermination of these people. What had to We must observe that there was no talk about structures to be developed, especially for these people. And then we have this new times with legislations setting forth different standards, especially the Spartan society sets forth something important here. And then we move on to Christianity and Christianity onwards. Next screen, please. A couple of screens ahead. Christianity here. We have the recognition of the right to life and welfare, housing, proper welfare. And that happens under the Christianity rules that sets forth that we are all brothers and sisters in arms, with a very existentialist concept, with a strong concept of segregation. People with disabilities would be seen as those incapable. At this point, we see the growth of this movement, and over the next 1,000 years, it would be the basis. The Age of Enlightenment sees the recognition of the right of the human being, and people with disabilities are more recognized, if you will. In France, for instance, we have the state taking responsibility over the very basic rights to health care, transportation, and so on, welfare. Along that period, we have at some point in history, as you see here, the institutionalization and segregation that will change. For further illustration here, the major conflicts of the 20th century brought changes in relations with the issues associated with peoples with disabilities, especially those because they were majorly affected by changes. One of them had to do with people going to the front lines to fight for ideals and would come back home with major war wounds and disabilities, even as a result of those battles. That's why we have the flourishing of major rehab institutions. Rehabilitation was a goal. Still out of these great wars periods, we have in 1948 the World Declaration of Human Rights that carries along with it the definition of the recognition by the UN about matters related to disabilities. In 1965, we have, in the post-war period, the inclusion of disabled people. We have Resolution 31 of the 14th of December 1990, saying that everyone must move from our awareness to action for the purpose of including disability. We have the Declaration of Salamanca 94, establishing the action structure in special education. We have the structuring of actions and projects that will focus not only on what was defined and set forth by existentialism, but the inclusion as a whole of these people. In the 20th century, we have the Guatemala Convention, eliminating all forms of discrimination against people with disabilities, signed by all countries. Still, here you see that people were seen as having disabilities. And we see that also these terms were changed along history. By the time we get to Guatemala, the Convention of Guatemala, there is a major concern by the side of society in terms of finding a proper terms to deal with the concept of people with disabilities. Going through people with special needs, people with deficiencies, getting to the point where it's more politically correct. And that was also about the inclusion of people with these certain characteristics. It's important that we note these different declarations. We have two more here, Madrid, that will set forth affirmative action, inclusive actions, and countries take on to them the responsibility to work on municipality, state, and the national level, setting forth actions that will be more inclusive. Sapporo 02, that is a summit that reinforces the concepts that have been dealt with before. And then we have the New York Convention. It's about promoting, protecting, and finding equality in terms of the human rights access. And it's fundamental that it deals with this question, this matter. And it sets forth that there should be respect towards dignity. So we have all this historic documentation and all these guidelines and guiding declarations. Brazil, from that point onwards, started to set forth ordinances as well, with three main bills and a decree. 1048, with the priority and service of everyone with disabilities, back in the day still referred to as people with lack of capacities. And then we have accessibility, a wider concept for people to be referred to with a wider range in the spectrum of what disability would be, recognized nationwide with new elements for requiring the respect towards that, making sure that people would abide by that. And then later on in history in Brazil, we have also penalties and how people should and would deal with that. Back in 2015, we have the statute of people with disabilities that will encompass the framework of the conventions and Brazilian legislation, setting forth that as the official way of establishing relationships with people with disabilities, setting forth very specific details on all levels and all levels of power within the state. How Sinai has been dealing with that, especially in terms of professional education. We have the challenges of a continent to deal with that, to abide by the legislation. And according to IBG, we have at least 40% of the population with some level of special type of prosthesis, orthesis, or other types of special needs, which is much more encompassing a term. The state of São Paulo has been a leader in terms of actions. Since 1996, we have had a department specifically dealing with those issues. We have served 24 states. We are 27 members, and we serve 24 states and the whole federation, the nation of Brazil. 580, I stand corrected here, municipalities were served dealing with the employability, in other words, of people with disabilities, with 780 major companies that became our partners, and it will be my pleasure to share who those are, especially in terms of the industry in the state of São Paulo. In the next screen, we share with you a screenshot of the school, our school. We have the advising of two companies in terms of inclusive actions, setting forth legal documentation. And prior to this point, we didn't have in Brazil, in the 90s, for instance, a legislation specifically for that. And it's amazing to see how many people currently are actually being benefited in terms of their employability, and those who were already in employment, how much they have profited in terms of benefits as a result of these new reforms. And we have started a service of consultancy companies in terms of how we could help companies in look further into that, especially in terms of dealing with people with disabilities. And I remind you that we have more than 500 school units throughout Brazil. And the Accessibility Convention, Salamanca Convention, that dealt specifically with methodologies, and all that had been set forth by that point had to be abidden by. Here's an example of what we look at when we get to a company. Most of the time, people exhibit lack of knowledge that, for instance, the accessibility lanes, for instance, they must have a minimum degree of inclination. And these very specific aspects are set forth by the Brazilian Association of Technical Guidelines that has since 94 set forth clearly some items of the legislation, and currently this year 2020 Sinai has been part of the revising of those guidelines. And the work that we do here at Sinai has been very consistent in terms of adapting the environment so that people can work, can have access to their place of work. We make sure that people have access to natural resources and how they experience the environment. The area has to ensure the safety and security for these people with disabilities so that they can also provide the level of productivity that they can actually have. At one level of our consulting, we have adequation and adaptation of places of work. Upon identifying, we have to look at aspects, for instance, that if we do not have clear terms, we have to understand how people see the adaptation of the environment of these people. And to these specific needs, we have to set forth specific terms and standards of the leveling of what is provided to people with and without disabilities. So we identify the current state of the structure in terms of depth, height, dimensions, for instance, as you see here. And we provide the companies, these companies, with the proper project, with setting forth the guidelines, technical guidelines and standards. And we provide that to people on a technical report. We have technical reports here that we provide these people with so that they can have a library, so that people can refer to upon making internal changes to the structures or along their contractors, structures, and service providers. Once the place of work and the changes are identified, we have to remember that since Salamanca, we understand what accessibility is. Nevertheless, it's not deployed nationwide yet. Upon identifying problems, we have to identify people with disabilities in and in the surrounding areas of the company that would need access. We have to see what type of limitations people have, whether it's motor or social there are social limitations, whether people have impairments of different levels here. The technical educational report. Once we identify that we have changes to be made, we must bear in mind that probably people didn't get proper education inclusion. That's why, since Salamanca's convention, we have a diagnosis that is considered preliminary, identifying what people have in terms of the training that they have received so far and how much inclusive that training was. So we have to go back to the very basic concept so that people, upon the end of the training suggestions that we suggest for implementation, people feel fully included. That's why, as of this point onwards, we have to sometimes review, revise, and redraft customized guidelines for specific disabilities. That is so that we ensure that these people from now on and in the future will have full access to employability. So after looking at education, I bring to you an image of one of these stages of our changes. We have more than 500 units in the country, and in the state of São Paulo it has been happening since 1999. We have had programs, technical training. You see a person here being trained in machining. This person, for instance, doesn't have the proper strength for dealing with the standard pieces of equipment. We have, for instance, electronic measurements and hoists and technical adaptations to the training and to the machines, pieces of machinery and equipment involved, so that they are properly prepared for these people. We decided to go see how other countries have dealt with these changes, and some of these countries actually were major teachers and major examples to us, such as Germany and Japan. This is 2010 in Düsseldorf, that has been extremely well succeeded in the inclusion of people with disabilities and elderly people as well. So it must be present throughout the guidelines in all countries, Brazil inclusive. In Japan, for instance, we have, after seeing the structure of the University of Kagoshima, we had them here in Brazil to discuss inclusion. And this university has a priority in research and development, including people with sensorial, motor, or intellectual disabilities. Next screen, please. This level, this stage of the work, was the basis for us being awarded a recognition by the UN in 2016, specifically on December the 2nd, 2016. Atipus, a company, one of the companies that we deal with, that helped us develop this program specifically, and the guidelines set forth were very impacting. Atipo is in the state of Mato Grosso do Sul, and then we'll see a little bit more of what has been done. It was extremely important for the whole progress in this scenario, because this recognition was of a very comprehensive nature. Paul, next screen, please. The development of assisting technologies. By concept, it is providing to each and every citizen access. And this type of technology should make life easier to people with disabilities. In other words, to make their lives, daily lives, possible. And we see the importance of assistive technologies. I will share with you a few of these technologies. Ministry of Science and Technology of Brazil, through their Center for Technology and Information, we developed an interface of technology and services with a number of adaptations to people with disabilities. We have the accessibility icon here. In this case specifically, you see the bottom right here. We have the filming of the sign language interpreter to translate that into the program, and then we develop images. This is for us to have a virtual interpreter on classes, events, and talks that we have in companies and schools. This recognition by the University of Texas in 2013 has recognized the importance of this work. Now let's look at more specific examples, and we'll see pieces of equipment. This is a very short video clip that can help you understand the importance of these technologies. This is a cooktop that has this burning stove with less risk of burning. In the regular stove cooktops, we would have people trying to reach for the back burners, for instance, and we could have the risk of being burned. Here, with the rotating bases, we have the wheelchair person, for instance, fitting under the table properly, and it has the buttons, for instance, upon being pressed, the burner rotates and comes to the person. For a person without a disability, life doesn't seem that much easier with this, but for a person with lower limbs disabilities, for instance, they can actually carry out actions that otherwise wouldn't be possible. We have here a bracelet. When we talk assistive technologies, we initially think about how costly development time is necessary, and it's not always the case. We have this home alarm aiming to warn our people who are deaf, that would provide them with the same level of security that is provided otherwise. We have here the same technology of the vibracol mode, vibrating mode, in other words. And when there is an alarm concerning a fire outbreak or something like that, the person, the deaf person, will get the vibrating alarm. It's not costly, and it didn't take much time. We have another video here that I think is very interesting. Senai is donating this to you. You open the lid here. You have the materials that you need. There is a sensor, so you have to properly close it. Once that is closed, you press that. It's incredible. Never in my life did I think it would be possible. Those resources are only possible due to the partnership with these companies that have been our partners in research and development. The drinking fountain 5296, the decree sets forth the need for adapted drinking fountains. They are no longer only available in the old format only, because they were too high. We see currently different drinking fountains side by side at different heights. Adaptation is very low cost. We added a button here that will adjust to the height of the user. Very low cost with high complexity. It's important in terms of assistive inclusion. In terms of the clothing sector, most people work sitting, and a lot of people have motor skills disabilities. The command of the sewing machines are normally pedals, therefore you would need your feet. So we would need to change the command and the placement of the button that priorly would be the pedal. We see here the development of the new model of sewing machine with the adaptation to the reality of a lot of people in the clothing with disabilities in the clothing industry. People that went through amputation or have limitation in terms of their abilities of the lower limbs would be included, and especially in this sector. Here is an adaptation of CNC machining, adaptation for people with amputation or lower limb motor skills disabilities. We see here that people with a lack of abilities in one of the upper limbs can actually operate these machines. They can be trained here, and their training would be based upon alphanumeric programming for CNC machining centers. Adaptation for people who had work-related accidents and had to return to work with limitations or disabilities. We have the electrical and mechanic working benches aimed for these people with a lack of abilities upon returning to work, especially those with the lack of abilities in the spinal area. Mitutoyo, along with that company, they have measuring. We have this sounding measuring ruler. A person with sight disabilities would be able to work in this warehouse or the controlling of the warehouse. This is a software developed by the Brazilian government and available for download free of charge. We see that the sound caliper, we have the spelling out of the measurement. People with sight impairments can work perfectly with these pieces of equipment. We have in this development of technologies the adaptation of our teaching models since the very early adaptation days with Braille and the technical adaptation. We have the tactile book that will allow for a person to have the same access. So it's basically information on a piece of artwork, for instance. People cannot touch upon the artwork itself, but they can touch upon this panel and they can read basically the information about that piece of artwork at a very fast pace. And for schoolwork, it's been measured for us to be able to deliver to students the geography, for instance, how to show planes or different geographies and the diversity of shapes, for instance, found in nature since 2002. We have the washable books here. A person with sight disabilities, they could actually count on these Braille books. This is the Feed Well program. How people can cook with cookbooks, just like everyone else. People, upon touching the pages, regular pages, would actually be subject to the risk of the contamination of their working areas and their food. So they can touch upon the page and wash the pages, and they are ready to go again. This screen reports a piece of information that's highly relevant. Since 96, Senai São Paulo has been developing this technology systematically, continuously, helping companies continuously since we started. We see here an action by Senai from the 1954. This is a person with sight disabilities, or a blind guy here, since 1954. Until 1996, we had adaptations done to these guidelines as per requirements, different requirements by companies. And we'll see here on the video. Companies actually try to recruit people with disabilities. Nevertheless, people have to be qualified nonetheless, because people with different levels of disabilities lack proper training programs. Since 1992, we are here at this building that used to be the Hospital Santa Casa de Misericórdia, and from 96 onwards, we started working with the training for the regular companies, and with the inclusion of people with disabilities. I feel like we are competing at the same level with people with no disabilities whatsoever. We have the resources in metal mechanic works, machining. Instead of having the regular turnings, we have CNC, involving people with physical disabilities, hearing disabilities. We trained a lot of people for the clothing industry. We feel we are not included. Unfortunately, we do not until get into this program at Senai, where we have the possibility to make friends and learn. She loves Senai because she feels like she's getting the proper attention, and she feels she's learning just as much as any of us. So it's proper training of the people with disabilities, with an inclusion project, with follow-up consulting for the companies. People from Senai came to me, found me one day, and they told me that they had these programs. And Heitor, my son, was trained for administrative skills services. Well, the program has been very helpful, and not only back then, but till this day. Yeah, it's about the quality of data, and we get testimonials from people from these areas that can actually dedicate better with better training. I'll be better prepared. I feel like I'm reaping the benefits already. We have apprenticeship programs for people with disabilities. I went through the administrative skills program, and I could learn all that is done in the administrative area. We see how people were unhappy and lacking proper programs, and we see how far we have come. Learn about Senai's programs and see the work that we develop here for people with disabilities. I think it's a way for us to change paradigms. It's most of the times about lack of knowledge rather than prejudice or anything like that. Here at Senai, you can learn that people are can be as qualified as anyone. I think they dealt with the matter brilliantly. Dear colleagues and friends, you see that most of these people were back in 2013 giving us these testimonials, and they are in World Skills. Wesley, for instance, that you saw here, was a national champion in IT. He is blind by birth. So the adaptation of teaching materials, resources, and technology will allow for people to have ensured access to technology, and teaching programs here are fundamental. I know we are running out of time, but we have here a quick, um, informative about how we are dealing with these terms now. The inclusion of people with deficiencies. That's how we dealt with the term back in 2003, 2005. And we see that the adaptation of the workplace and the area for people and the uh, teams working. Here I'll show you through the video how far we have come since then. As per the Labor World Organization, people with disabilities, 8% of the economic active population of the planet, sets forth that people didn't have or don't have as much access to the place of work as any other people. 24 million people with disabilities still are not up to the task and haven't been given the proper attention. Skin Cariol, along with Senai, started program Skin Disability Inclusions program. This program, Skin Inclusion Program, came out of our difficulties to recruit people with disabilities. This partnership with Senai became more and more solid and we started having a proper dimensioning of what we wanted to do. To talk about skin inclusion program for people with disability is very emotional because it makes us very happy. It's brought upon our goals a lot of progress through sensibilization actions. People were trained in terms of how people with different levels of disabilities would face challenges on a daily basis. People who will start working on this program along with us will teach us and they will be able to learn from us as well. It's for the whole of our country and for us. Everyone should be subject to a teaching seminar such as this. It has the purpose of the inclusion of people with disabilities on all levels of the uh, manufacturing industries, abiding by the different levels of difficulties to the access of their place of work. We have the inclusion of people with disabilities here included in the skin disability inclusion program, making lives of everyone easier. And the training of teachers of our state schools and public schools. the partnership between Skin Carol and Senai, the town hall of this city also made possible a professional teaching program abiding by the needs of those with disabilities and helping people with disabilities. Clearly, you cannot do that without having schools that are more inclusive, including those professional schools. Currently, we serve 170 nationwide companies, such as in Skin Cariol. And this is the first experience that we had with the whole program implemented, with the training of people with disabilities, the training of teachers, so that the project isn't over by the end of the program, and so that we have better follow-up as well. My major difficulty was talking to people with hearing disabilities. Yesterday, even, I was able to talk to a person that I otherwise wouldn't be able to talk. It's great to feel like we are understanding them and you're being understood. With the proper training, I was able to change that around, and it was wonderful. The labor market has profited majorly, and this is was our purpose. We all have learned here. It's very important to have been trained. It's a new experience in terms of manufacturing, and if it hadn't been like this, we wouldn't be able to be where we are. There are people with specific needs, but we all learn by including everyone. The climate in the workplace and the manufacturing floor, we see people feeling more at ease, and you see that they are working more joyfully and experiencing their daily lives in a much better way. It started back when I was at university, and I learned that Skin Cariol was starting this social inclusion program, and it's very difficult for a person with disability to find employment. They are excluded from society, but that's changing, thank God. Our expectations are growing along with the program here, such as with this social inclusion program. People adapted quite well. They are able to perform the same tasks as any other of our colleagues. And our colleague here in our sector, that department that was trained, actually made all our lives richer for having him around and for teaching us so much. I'm very happy to have been selected to be part of this Skin Cariol family. This training program is of major importance for everyone. A lot of people didn't find employment. Companies didn't give us the opportunity of employment. And the company gains as much as we do on our daily tasks. Besides a better work market, I got a hearing aid from the company, and it made my life much easier for myself and my family. It will change my life completely around, and I thank God, I thank the Lord and the company. It's a new opportunity for employment and for uh, new opportunities. The goals set forth by this very challenging project have been met, adapting the environment for teachers and students, changing the lives of a lot of people. Dear friends, if you will help me with the next screen. Nothing will be accomplished by a man standing alone. We have to come together so that we include each and every person with disability. We'll have here the different companies, many of these companies present in your countries, back in your countries, multinational companies that are helping us in the training, the adaptation, and we have better quality provided to these people with better working place conditions. We have here per sector. A lot of these companies are global companies in the food industry, for instance, the auto sector. We have here the different sectors, and I want to make sure that we can deal with the questions as well. Food and beverage sector, footwear, all sectors. If we have the maritime sector, for instance, we identified even in those sectors needs for adaptation. And we had the opportunity to rethink the scenario in terms of assistive assistive guidelines, setting forth proper technology, changing the lives of those who need it. People with generation and distribution of energy by energy companies, waterways, transportation, roadways, the air industry, chemical, pharma sector, pulp and paper. Probably you'll identify many of these companies. Metalwork company, ports, water ports. Healthcare. We have a very comprehensive sector in Brazil, and we have to have adaptations according the number of employees. We have the companies in Latin America as well. I had the opportunity to learn about legislations upon attending the UNICEF summit. air industry, supports to civil aviation, including civil aviation, food and beverage sectors, food and services industry. All these companies went through our inclusion programs with the proper adaptation to these different areas, but more or less like we have seen in this video here. I think this work was possible because, according to international conventions, we can serve multi um, sectors, these different areas, with people to help us put these teams together. Ana Laura from psychology, technology, IT actually. You see Fabio Hudson, Carla, physiotherapy, Elson, work, health and safety, Josie with teaching, psychopedagogy, business management because of what the work we do in this area. And three colleagues that are from World Skills America that became part of our team after winning their respective skills in Kanzan. We have Gustavo, one of the trainers of the group that currently is a supervisor of the team. Mechanical engineering is his area. Leonardo, who's CAD. Artur, we have Avelino, Polo Mechanics. Artur is from integrated manufacturing. All these people were able to join us upon our endeavors thanks to these adaptations. I would like to wrap up here. You can send me questions. Professor Elvesios, if you can read the questions so that we can all have a clear idea of the context of the answers. I have here a statement by Mr. Maria Pesanti. In Paraguay, we are trying to pass a bill for the inclusion of some companies and the rights related to those, but we are still undergoing that process. It's still, well, Maria, you see, Brazil has this as a very long standing process that has to keep going. When I mentioned specific dates, we have here major challenges in Brazil. And Sinai has been a spearhead for the whole of the country, a flagship in terms of these inclusive actions. We have to prepare the world for the diversity of the world. Our external relations director can contact you and develop further. Elena Fernandez from Costa Rica. Senai in their training units. People with motor skills or physical disabilities, is that the right question? Professional training. You mean PCD trainers? If you recall the video clip that I just shared with you, it shows it. We are training teachers not only to work here, but to work in basic education. The math and literacy basic skills training. And the benefits has been to all levels of the federation. Elena, there is a willingness from Senai to work with you. Senai will develop these different fronts along with their external relations directors directly and sharing the material that we have shared here. Let me see if I can read the question here. Just a second, bear with me. Gray Alvarez from Colombia. The process in Colombia has showed and depended upon the different departments. We have worked with science and technology, the ministry. You in Brazil are doing great work. This is a statement rather than a question. Congratulating our Ministry of Science and Technology and the Labor Attorney's Office, state and nationwide. A major partner have been these companies. We have been working internally, and we have been making adaptations for people to work with safety and security as well. Ms. Fernandez from Costa Rica, if we have here at Senai the proper adaptation tools. We work with governmental departments, universities. We do work along with universities to make sure that the proper process is in place. We have to make sure that we can transfer what we have as well as preparing people, training people. You have a cooperation program for the systems of countries in the region in terms of training, technical assistance, and training of teachers. We have Professor Spada. He was very successful in the organization of World Skills America. It can be developed, but we do not have a cooperation program undergoing implementation. But that is the role of this department, and I'm sure that our people, along with Professor Spada, will make sure that we take these discussions further. Mr. Morales asks what adjustments we have to have in place for people with disabilities. So we have proper programs for people with moderate intellectual disabilities, people who need specific typing boards, support in their upper limbs so that they can work properly. And for the autism spectrum, Asperger, for instance, has different syndromes or dysfunctions of the autism spectrum, as we refer to in Brazil. And the one with the caliper, we have DOSVox in Brazil, the software. If you can take down that name, DOSVox, those folks. It has a database. It's available at the Ministry of Education in Brazil. We can help you get hold of this. In each situation, we have used different adaptations and different softwares. Yolanda Fuentes from El Salvador. Let me see if I get it right. I'm from El Salvador. How is the management of your inclusion program? The program in the history of this program started with a lot of questioning from our side. We enrolled 18 people back in 1996 to work here. And as a challenge, we have, um, upon enrolling people with disabilities, especially sight impairments, while these people were on this module, my concern as a director of this school was about what type of training and support they would have so that they would have proper employment and their own income. We decided to see what was available in terms of software. We had to find alternatives. When we were able to get hold of what we needed, we had to also prepare the company to welcome the individual. That's why you saw people with different disabilities and different difficulties in the videos that we shared here. And when we had people go through the training program, going through the same levels of impairments that people with disabilities have, people had to learn that so that they would see the real need for the adaptation of the structures. So this awareness raising is just as important as the adaptations themselves. We started with professional training, thinking of where people would work, how they would behave. That's why the Skincarel video shows these different stages. The concern of the company upon getting in the proper consultancy, we test and we certify work safety conditions. And we do what we have in Brazil under the name of supported employment, so that people are supported upon reaching the labor market. How people are supported upon their arrival in companies, how they are dealing with their co-workers, their managerial team, because people have this major leap going on from having restrictions and reaching the workplace. In generals, and I does that, starting with apprenticeship programs at the age of 13, but that's much more gradual. That's why we have these people with disabilities having more attention, so that the program actually would be properly implemented. Questions that are not dealt with here due to the lack of time restraints, in other words, I'll make sure that our team actually responds. Jenny Almenda, what are the strategies for professional inclusion of people with disabilities in your country? I'll share an important piece of data here. Inclusion is a process undergoing constructions worldwide as well as in Brazil. if all companies would abide by the ordinance that sets forth the adaptations necessary for people with disabilities, we would have multi hundreds of people with disabilities being included in the work labor market. We have almost 50% of improvements to have in place before we can actually be in a slightly comfortable position. That's why we're working on this strategy to take down myth, to change mindsets in our countries in terms of the abilities of people with disabilities. And we have to bear in mind that we have more than 1200 years of history of a fight for better conditions for people with disabilities. And we have to keep on working so people can actually work and be included in a market that is not only in our countries, they should be able to have proper access worldwide. We see more and more the media dealing with the matters, and we see that there is more integration of these people. We are still far from being in a comfortable, thoroughly comfortable place. And that's why it's important for us to share knowledge, to hold these meetings, and so that we have the proper inclusion of people. In Brazil, Genie, we still have challenges. I think we are at around 50% of the whole population of people with disabilities in terms of the number of people that should be in the labor market. So we have, in order to be positive, and to understand that it's a process that is long. Ms. Gamboa, what's the first approach that we have when contacting the company in terms of these inclusion programs? Are there specific guidelines for that? Our first approach has been in terms of sharing the international conventions that we saw here. We have to see how socially aware people are in different areas. Our approach is in that sense. We set that forth to the company, and we show how much the company profits in general, not on the account of abiding by the law, but being more socially inclusive, therefore being perceived more widely. Public transportation is a major point. We have specific strategies. I mentioned a few of them. And we have to serve companies that are being charged with for not abiding by. We have penalties so that we have awareness of the importance and people feel like they must be inclusive. And we must remember also that during formal education, we didn't have people receiving the proper training. And people are more responsible, much more concerned. And once companies perceive that in their results, they will take more responsibility as well. We have a program here in our company school that deals with myths and what is real in the inclusion scenario, in the inclusion of people with disability scenario. We do not have fiscal incentive in Brazil, tax exemption or tax benefits. We have major incentives in terms of less interests or um, slight incentives still, but a long way to go upon acquiring companies acquiring pieces of equipment. Edwin Diaz Rivera, what's the profile or the area of expertise of people in training and support, teachers and support staff? So that is for the purpose I ask of being more inclusive. At Wayne, we have people with proper training. We made sure that people that we had in our team would understand the challenges, especially in people with sight impairment, hearing impairment, people who would need orthesis, prosthesis. We have two people with intellectual impairment. I um, was trained in that area as well. So we have people prepared to provide services in all these different areas. We have the occupational therapists and physical therapists properly prepared to serve these different populations. We have repetitive strain injury also as a focus of what we have to deal with. In parallel, we have mechanics, automation, electronics, IT are areas that we have people helping us from inside the company, helping us identify the potential behind what we have for people. Professor Elvésio, Professor, I will apologize, but we will answer the remaining questions per email due to the fact that we are way ahead of the planned schedule. I would like to thank the representations from the different countries. You are very essential in our relationships. Directive Committee, Mr. Escobar, Ms. Moore, that leads the Americas Committee, always very focused. I cannot forget our technical people here, Paul, Marino, and Anderson. Professor Elvésio, our guest. Thank you very much. You have been major help and have met our expectations completely. Professor Arsenio was our voice in terms of the importance of sharing of knowledge in education, especially professional education. I am not the person to talk about your work because I'm very proud of your work and I've known you for more than 40 years, so I could be biased. But I know you, how committed you are an educator. One of the first pieces of reading that I came across was by Socrates. Socrates, the philosopher, would certainly commend you for the beautiful work that has been accomplished so far under your management. I thank all guests, and next month we'll have one more webinar. You'll all be informed of the proper data and dates, actually. Thank you, Professor Elvésio. Thank you for all you have accomplished, and long live your projects. I feel emotional every time I have the opportunity to come in contact with your work. I have kept track of what you have done for such a long time. And you're very passionate about what you do, and you make people admire what you do. Thank you all involved in the different levels of adaptation, and we'll have a much fairer and just world if we continue on this pathway. Thank you all. Thank you, Professor Elvesio, from the bottom of my heart. Gracias all. Thank you all.